okay, but I'm not Ahmed Jamal. Actually, up to 11 o'clock, this is the update of injured people, and 96 injured reach to the hospital. 96 people reach to the hospital. 6 of them rushed to the operation theater. The injury was between pneumothorax fractures, head injuries, and severe head injury. Actually, one of the head injuries patient now in the ICU, 3 admission to the ICU. One of them is already brain dead, but no dead body reached to the hospital, and nobody died.
So you don't have any figures on the number of people that you think or you heard have died in Bahrain today?
In the hospital, there is nobody died in the hospital. Actually, the severe injury was 6, and it was rushed directly to the theater. And only one, and there is two head injury, but one of them is brain dead, but not declared to be dead.
Okay, and we heard reports as well, Dr. Ahmed, from today in Bahrain that some of the ambulances were prevented from picking up the injured and the dead from the streets where these protests and these clashes occurred. Did you hear that as well? And
yes.
Is that the situation right now?
Yeah, by 4 o'clock, the evening. Okay, the doctors and all staff protest against the Minister of Health, and their demand was to push him to resign because of the prevention of ambulance from reaching the site of the site where people injured and where people shot. Actually, yesterday the ambulance prevented from reaching the site for around maybe 9 hours from the event. Then lastly, after big pressure from all the staff and doctors, they released some ambulance which reached there, but there is nothing there. There is no injured people, and all the area was cleared. Today, initially they prevent the ambulance from reaching the site, but lately, after negotiations, they release the ambulance, but not all the ambulance, and it is near the site, not exactly at the site, because there is distance between the site of stopping the ambulance and the actual site of the event.
Okay.
This is what happened exactly today.
All right, Dr. Ahmed, thank you very much for speaking to us from Bahrain. Well, the unrest isn't just confined to Libya and Bahrain. And just to give you a sense of the protests that are sweeping the region, take a look at this map. We've highlighted all the countries that have seen public protests of some kind, either in support of their government or against, or both. In Yemen, at least 6 people have been killed during anti-government protests, and that's just in the past 24 hours. A so-called Friday of Rage attracted thousands of people to the capital, Sana'a. Demonstrations calling for the president to resign have now gone on for 8 straight days in the country. In Jordan, at least 8 people were injured in clashes between pro and anti-government groups. The fighting broke out in the capital, Amman, after Friday prayers. Protesters were calling for more freedoms and lower food prices. It was the 7th Friday in a row in which Jordanians had rallied in their country. Well, Friday also marked 1 week since mass protests in Egypt toppled Hosni Mubarak from power. Millions of Egyptians filled the streets to mark the occasion and to maintain pressure on the new military government, which has promised democratic reforms. Raya Rageh reports from Cairo's Liberation Square.
Draped in red, white and black, thousands of Egyptians come to Tahrir Square, this time not in protest, rather to mark their hard-won victory.
Contrary to the scenes of anger and frustration that lasted here in Tahrir Square for days before Hosni Mubarak stepped down, the mood this Friday is one of joy and celebration, smiles everywhere.
And a tribute to the country's military, who even before the end of Mubarak's rule last week was hailed for not obstructing the pro-democracy movement. The military had asked Egyptians to stop their protests, but it did not prevent the gathering on Friday. Instead, Tahrir was surrounded by tanks and soldiers who searched people and regulated traffic. The gathering not only a victory march, but also a memorial to the 300-plus people who lost their lives in the uprising. The highlight of the day, an appearance by Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, one of Sunni Islam's most prominent clerics. In a heartfelt ceremony, he praised the revolution, the youth behind it, and the military, though he did make a direct request.
I call on the Egyptian army to liberate us from the government that Mubarak formed in his last days. We want a new government that does not include the old faces that remind people of poverty and misery.
But he also urged patience with the country's interim military leadership. The current cabinet was appointed by Mubarak before he stepped down. A reshuffle is expected in the coming few days.
I came here all the way from Upper Egypt because all I want is an end to corruption. We want this government changed. We don't want Mubarak's party members in power.
It is true that we need to be patient, but at the same time we need to remind the government and whoever is there that we are still in the streets. And we still have a lot of other demands that they need to pay attention to.
And until they see the country's 30-year emergency law lifted and the thousands of political prisoners released, many say they will keep the pressure. Rawi Rageh, AlJazeera, Cairo.
Well, just kilometers away from Liberation Square, another rally is taking place, and this one featuring pro-Mubarak supporters. And AlJazeera's Shireen Tadros is there.
A rally to restore Hosni Mubarak's pride. That is what this event has been billed as. And hundreds of people have turned up to show their support to the former president and to say that they're not against the revolution, they're not against change, but they are against the way in which Hosni Mubarak was talked about and the way in which he stepped down at the end of 30 years of service. And they're here also to say thank you to Hosni Mubarak for that service. But even with all these words of support for Hosni Mubarak, nobody here is asking for him to be reinstated. It feels a lot more like people want to give him a happier send-off. And the fact that this rally can take place just kilometers away from the one in Liberation Square, where people are expressing very different feelings, shows just how far this country has come in the last few weeks.
To other news now, the United States has blocked a UN Security Council resolution condemning Israel's settlement building in the West Bank.